as you're reading this passage, when I'm talking about annotation, I'm saying, okay, we want to think about the main idea. The fact that you circled that in itself, you're engaging the parietal lobe, but also you're engaging long-term memory that works into working memory, right? In the prefrontal cortex. That's the decision maker. That's the manager of your brain. And when we do that, we're able to make decisions that are both in the short term that provide us dopamine, but in the long term that provide us with serotonin, oxytocin, these neurotransmitters that help us to sustain energy and to sustain focus, right? Because oftentimes I see this with students on tests. They'll start out by having a great score on those beginning sections because they remember the strategies to annotate, for instance. But then things can kind of go off the track. And that's okay. Mindfulness is a big part of this as well. Are you mindful of the fact? Are you using metacognition, thinking about your thinking in order to say, okay, I'm not quite being on the track with this question. Let me make my own answers. Let me annotate, right? So first things first, don't even read the passage. Annotate your question. So on the second question, we want to know about the message that the author is trying to get across. Now, point of view, that is incredibly important on these kinds of tests. Again, any grade level, you want to know what the author is getting across, not what the main character is getting across, not what the antagonist is getting across, right? What do you see from their point of view? Excellent. So, and also in the first sentence of the piece. So we immediately know where to look, right? That's what I would call a brake pedal moment. So teaching high school, many of my students are just starting to drive. Use analogies that are helpful to them, right? A brake pedal moment, we're going to pump the gas on the parts that aren't important, and we're going to slow down on those moments where they are important. So it's not a matter of timing, I would say, but a matter of priorities. And I think that that can make you a lot less stressed on the test in itself, lowering that activity in the amygdala, increasing that activity in the prefrontal cortex to create reading comprehension, right, in the brachial region. If we go to question 3, same thing. We just want to know Larry's demeanor. So I often phrase it like, if you're going to a dinner party, would you rather know nobody or would you rather know a lot of people there so you know what's going on? If you're going to a wedding, would you rather know a few people there? Well, I think most people would rather know someone who's there, right? Same thing here. If we go to the text and we don't know anything about what's going on, then we're again passively reading. And it just shows through our science, when we passively read, it's kind of like watching television. We zone out and we take things in, but we're not creating something in our mind. And that can often cause people to lose focus, particularly if they have a learning difference, right? In this next one, we see a line number. We often see this. So, in question 3, what is the best evidence? On questions that you see like this, again, you'll see this on the ISEE. This is for students who are trying to go from a public school to a private school in elementary schools. You'll see this on the SAT, the ACT, the GMAT, the GRE, any of these tests, you'll notice this coming up, right? What is the evidence to support your opinion? Now, whenever I say something, I usually have to back it up right away, right? And the test is kind of the exact same way. So if your answer is coming from paragraph 1, your explanation is likely coming from paragraph 2, right? So instead of testing answers in order, it can be a lot more helpful to test answers in the order of which you think they're going to be right. And then once you do that, you can move on and say, I've done this to the best of my ability. I'm ready for the next question, right? Number 5, we see paragraph 6. So we know where to look and we want to know about Ari's character, right? Same thing kind of going on. Even if you don't remember every single word to bring to the text, it's going to be in your mind because your eyes create acetylcholine, right? And acetylcholine, it happens in this part of the brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And what acetylcholine does is it's like a highlighter. It basically says, these are the things that I need to remember. So even if you don't have it at the front of your mind, it's in there somewhere, right? It's in there somewhere. So you'll see it when you're reading the text. Again, whenever you see things in parentheses, these are times where you can kind of guess what the test maker is going to say, right? Or what the teacher even is going to say. And I think we should encourage our students to do that, right? Because if we're encouraging our students to anticipate what we're asking for, 2/3 of the problem is solved, in the words of my father, right? Once you know what's being asked of you, it's a lot easier to give that thing rather than to passively think of everything as one thing, right? So we see this phrase of kaf dobum, which is a Persian saying, right? So what can we infer from this phrase? So when this phrase comes up, it's going to pop into our mind, right? So this is what I mean by annotation. And I'd say take just a minute or two. A lot of people think this is a waste of time, or that like they don't have enough time to do this kind of annotation. But I think it's time that's very, very well spent. Now, when you're reading the text, I would change this word reading and I would put it into something that's more like skimming. And what I mean by that is that if we look at this first paragraph, we have a lot going on. Even this first sentence, Ari was a man that was immune to the rejection that most human beings find insufferable, right? This is one of our questions, right? So we need to take a brake pedal moment. So I would recommend putting a star here. Just doing that brings that to your attention. But also, there's some information that we don't exactly need. So instead of looking at the tree, looking at the bark, step back for a second and notice the things that pop out. Well, for me, West Texas heat, that's our setting, right? Well, he's biking 18 miles and he's sweating, he's perspiring, and he's going to Larry Massey's office. So all of these things combined together, we kind of understand who is Ari, because we've already got it from the questions. We're understanding who is Larry. Ari clearly has to put in a lot of work to get to Larry's office, so it seems like Larry's in charge. That's what I'm saying. At the end of the sentence, can you just give a one-sentence summary of what's going on? Because that keeps you, again, on the track. You're a train going this way, and it's okay for your mind to go this way. With mindfulness, we can be metacognitive and say, let's bring it back on track, right? So as you're doing this, keep looking back, okay? We go to the second paragraph. He was with the man of the stature of a basketball player. That can say a lot, right? He's nibbling lemon on the rim of his cup. Again, all of these things, drawing inferences whenever we can, and trying to see these kinds of metaphors, figurative language, particularly in older grades. These are the things that we're going to be asked about, right? These are the things that make good writing. So when we're able to teach our students what to look for, and especially what to just underline, what that does for the brain, I can't say it enough. It engages that parietal lobe, and it makes it so that we're able to not feel that same kind of stress, frustration when we're reading. And again, this isn't for every kind of person with a learning difference, but I think it can be incredibly helpful for people with ADHD and dyslexia. Just the way that we phrase those terms as learning differences rather than disorders, that can help in itself. So after kind of skimming through this very quickly, I would say, you're really only looking for three things. And those three things are the CSS. And I kind of went over that a little bit briefly. You want to know the character, the sequence, and the summary. I'll be honest with you, as a child, I was a terrible reader. I would not read a lot until I got into my college years, and then I ended up becoming an English teacher. So you truly never know, right? But I would read very slow, and I'm still someone who's probably a slow reader. But compensating for that fact has helped me to learn ways to speed read, like using your CSS, like using brake pedals, like using annotation, right? And the last thing that I'll say is if your student is taking a test, the reading to answering ratio should be about double, right? When you're answering questions, it should be about 2 times the time. And the reason that I say that is if you look at these questions, they are describing very particular things. Larry's demeanor, right? We can find that in a particular place. And oftentimes, these tests are ordered sequentially. So question 1, 2, and 3 come from that introduction, and questions 8, 9, and 10 come from that conclusion, and then we see things narrow in the middle, right? So in a broader sense, the more that we can teach our students what to expect, we lower their allostatic load, or their load of stress, how much they can handle. And when you can handle more, you can put more into the lesson in terms of comprehending the text. Now, I think sometimes we can be a bit old school in how we choose to say we are comprehending the text. Now, we're not trying to read our favorite novel all the time, right? We're trying to be able to take out what we need from the text because that is what school is about eventually, right? We need to be able to take a large amount of information and make something meaningful to our brain, right? So, in a lot of ways, providing analogies to say, okay, you're a football player. Let's think about it this way. If you're a quarterback, you need to study what plays are going to come up. You need to highlight what the defense is going to do in this situation, and you need to apply it to that. Very similar to the reading section. That's annotation in real life, right? Let's say that you're a dancer, you're a merengue dancer. You need to match your body with the body of the other person. And that comes from some sense of flow, right? That same sense of flow happens when we annotate, when we're able to show ourselves that we are entering a zone of continuous work, continuous flow, metacognition again, thinking about our own thinking. The more that we can encourage students to do that, we're not encouraging them just scholastically or just in reading or just in math. We're encouraging them as a whole student to understand what's happening in my body, what do I feel, right? As well as what do I think, because they're connected, right? And providing this holism to education, I think it gives us a sense of mental health, it gives us a sense of mental well-being, while also giving us a sense of scholastic well-being, right? So they're all tied together. So take-home message from all these things is when you're teaching reading comprehension, you're teaching a whole student, which I know that you know, but I think that we can go even further and try to really suss that out. What does it mean to teach a whole person? Well, I think in a lot of ways it means I understand the struggles that you're going through, but I also see the benefits of the struggles that you're going through. So how can I accommodate you while also celebrating those struggles, truly celebrating those struggles, right? Because it takes 5 fingers to make a hand. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a hand. I couldn't grab things. I couldn't do these different things. So I really want us to celebrate these learning differences. Also think about how can we accommodate them. So I always end my lesson with 3 things with students. And I think that if you go over 3 things, a lot of times it's just too much, right? So number 1, annotation. Engage your parietal lobe. Create that circuit in the subcaudate cortex to the prefrontal cortex so that you're making valid and smart decisions. That's true of any age because the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop till we're 25 fully. So the more you can help students to do that at younger ages, they'll be more prepared to not make risky decisions and to make proper long-term goals that are going to help them in their lives. What's more beautiful than that, right? And the second thing that I'd say, when we're teaching reading comprehension, many teachers probably were superb students in school, and that's fantastic. But when we're teaching someone who maybe is struggling with reading comprehension, maybe reading doesn't have to take the same form as it did for someone who's a very successful reader just naturally, right? So again, when someone with dyslexia is reading, they're not only using the brachial area, they're using the amygdala, they're using the prefrontal cortex to try to make sense of what's going on. They're using the ventral medial subcortex. So they're using the whole brain. Now we can look at that as a deficit, but I don't. When you're using the whole brain, you're making more connections, but it sure makes it harder to understand all of the information that you're trying to digest if you're doing it passively. So number 2, make reading active. Read your questions first. Understand who's going to be at the dinner party, so to speak, before you get to that story. Last thing, and most importantly, I think on standardized tests in particular, and it's becoming very, very important for students of all ages. When you're taking a standardized test and you're doing reading comprehension, make your own answer instead of looking at those answers. In a lot of ways, I say when you look at the answers, you've already kind of taken something away from yourself. You've put yourself in quicksand. And what's the only way out of quicksand? Stop moving, right? You need someone to pull you out because the more you're churning, the deeper you kind of go. And this confusion, it doesn't just affect question 1, it affects question 2, 3, and 4, right? So thinking about the test holistically, thinking about the student holistically, I think applies to that third topic of make your own answers. Think about that sense of holism when you're doing reading.